I've got to ask, when you were growing up, were you known to be a good kid? Now, you might find it hard to believe, but when I was growing up, I was called a good but difficult child. Now, I want to ask you what you found harder to believe, that I was a good child, that I was a difficult child, or that I was a child at all. But let me give you an instance for why I was known to be a good but difficult child. When I was 5 years old, my mother had told me to do XYZ. And I said, "Well, mommy, why do I have to do XYZ?" And she put her hands on her hips and said, with very great self assurance, something that she thought was self evidently true to her and self evidently self justifying. She said, "Because I said so." And at age 5, I said, "Mommy, when you say, 'because I said so,' that usually means you don't know why I should do it either." And I live to tell the tale, but I think I've been on that trajectory ever since. Stay with me, I've got a story to tell. Hi, I'm Jesuit Father Robert McTeigue, your host every day of the Catholic Current, coming to you from the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. Let's take a closer look. Glad you're here. We tend to have a variety of ways that we get authority wrong. We either have absolutely overbearing authority, we think of the tyranny of governments, or we have a capitulation of authority, say the failure of governments to do what they're supposed to do, and we have the usurpation of authority. We think of political revolution, for example. But authority is not just a political thing, it's a family thing, it's a theological thing as well. And if we get it wrong, then look around. It's the mess that we're in. One of the reasons we're in the mess that we're in is there's been nearly a systemic failure of authority. So let's think it through. Where does authority come from? It's not the ability to say, "because I said so." It's not contrary to Chairman Mao saying, "because I said so," while holding a gun. So, what does authority really mean? Well, authority comes from two Latin words. The first is auctor, where we get author or originator. And this is where we get words like authentic and authenticate. We relate authority to law. The lawgiver is the one who has the right to give the law. And the law is not meant to be a mere dictate, not a mere "because I said so." It's meant to be an expression of reason to help serve the common good. And if it violates that, then it's an unjust law, and we don't owe obedience to unjust law. Natural law makes that very clear. Authority is also related to algerie, which means to augment, to build up. So law isn't just a body throwing its weight around, but it's meant to be an expression of legitimate reason to build up, to augment, to serve the greater good, and to serve the common good. Well, why do we get that wrong? Because we're human beings, we're fallen, we're selfish, we're not always team players. And we're always kind of jockeying for position. And somebody sometimes needs to be the adult in the room and say, "No, here's the line, and here are the consequences." And when that doesn't happen, well, we saw what happened in San Francisco when they decided to not really enforce laws against shoplifting. There was so much shoplifting that stores went out of business and they had to close. So when there's a failure of a legitimate authority, criminals might win, thugs might win, but everybody else loses. Let me give you some examples of authority gone wrong. There is the failure to exercise proper authority. From August of 2023 to January 25, the federal government had a phone number, a hotline. So if you entered the country illegally as an unaccompanied minor and then were placed with someone, government was never really sure, but with someone for care, you could call this hotline. Well, between the founding of the hotline and the inauguration of the next administration, 65,000 calls went unanswered. Now, granted, some children were calling to complain about stale bread, stale bread, and others were calling to complain about really horrific abuse. But in any case, nobody did their job. No one exercised legitimate authority to care for the children who were counting on them. That's a significant failure. Another example of a significant failure, I remember sitting in a coffee shop with a friend at a tourist spot, and a tourist bus had stopped, and a lot of people got off, got in this long line for coffee. Two women were talking. This little girl, about 5 years old, walks up to her mother, wallops her in the abdomen, yanks on her sleeve, and says, "Let's go now." And the mother looked up at her adult friend and just said, "Sorry," and ran off to be tugged away by the tyrant 5-year-old. And I wanted to say, you think that's going to get easier when there's hormones and she's a teenager? But I bit my tongue. That was not my place. That's going to be really bad. That kind of failure of authority is going to be bad for mom, bad for the whole family, certainly very bad for the little girl as she grows up. One more area where there's been a failure of authority, candidly, is in the church. I am so tired of seeing priests and deacons in vestments shucking and jiving and singing to songs in front of the tabernacle. That has to stop. The bishop needs to put the smack down on that and maybe introduce a bread and water diet for clergy who should really know better. When there is a failure of authority, the whole structure breaks down, and the people who try to do the right thing, often sacrificially, have the morale crushed when they realize that people aren't trying to live up to standards at all, and there's no consequence. When legitimate authority fails to act, everyone in their care realizes we don't matter. What we're doing doesn't matter. And that's never good for morale. We also have to talk about the usurpation of authority. I remember as a young religious going to a meeting of ministers from different organizations and churches and so on. And this one young lady said when we were talking about why to get involved in ministry, and this one young lady said, "I got into ministry to find my voice and claim my authority." And I thought to myself at the time, you don't claim your authority, especially not in ministry. You receive your authority from God, who is the author, the agent of ministerial authority to whom he delegates to his ministers. So she's claiming her authority. She's a usurper. Some people are beginning to raise some very interesting questions about the magic word synodality and whether or not that usurps the God-given, Christ-given authority of the hierarchy to govern the church. That's another topic for another time. What's the moral of the story? Exercising authority well is hard. Giving in and capitulating on legitimate authority is all too easy. And sadly, there are too many people who are ready to grab the wheel when they have no right to. So, what do we do about that? Well, I don't have a 3-point program for fixing people who fail to exercise authority or people who abuse authority or people who usurp authority. I will ask that we consider what authority really means, understand how God-given it is, and maybe, just maybe, spend some time with Scripture, read a little bit of St. Paul about authority, read a little Thomas Aquinas. I recommend his treatise on laws, but we have to fix it. We can't just say, people in authority, well, what are you going to do? Because that breaks it all for everyone. Think of these things today, take them to prayer, and talk about it with those you love. Go in peace, and please do pray for me, for I am a sinner. Thanks for watching today. I release new videos on Mondays and Wednesdays. Check out the archives for more videos. You can listen to my podcast at stationofthecross.com, and you can find my written work at heraldofthegospel.org. See you next time.